Hi, thank you for watching Digging to China. I'm Dong Xiong. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much. On May 24th, Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin paid a visit to China and was personally received by Xi Jinping. Chinese media also presented a positive coverage of the visit, highlighting the efforts to strengthen economic cooperation and ties between China and Russia. However, shortly after the visit, the Financial Times released a news article revealing that the Russian Prime Minister's visit to China turned out to be fruitless once again. This time, the visit carried a specific task assigned by Vladimir Putin. Despite enjoying several days of hospitality, the Chinese authorities did not grant approval to the request. What exactly was this matter that left the Russians so disappointed and dejected? The Financial Times article is titled, "Power of Siberia. China keeps Putin waiting on gas pipeline." It reads, Russia's Prime Minister left China this week without a reward Moscow has long prized: a clear commitment from Beijing on Power of Siberia 2, a grand gas pipeline project to transform energy flows across Asia. Conceived more than a decade ago to help Russia turn to the east, the pipeline through Mongolia to China was a way to diversify gas sales, boost revenues, and give the Kremlin more diplomatic clout. That project has taken on new urgency since the invasion of Ukraine, with Moscow seeking new outlets for gas that flowed to Europe before sanctions stood in the way. The hitch for Moscow is that Beijing appears in no rush to engage. It is a reticence that analysts say shows how weak wartime Moscow's bargaining power has become when dealing with its economically more powerful neighbor. This matter is quite interesting, and I'll provide some background information for you. Back in 2019, the Power of Siberia 1 was launched. It will reach its maximum capacity of 38 billion cubic meters per year by 2024. But this pipeline relied on developing new gas fields in eastern Siberia, which had never sent the fuel to Europe, making it less useful to Moscow's diversification strategy. The Power of Siberia 2, in contrast, aims to supply China with gas from the northeastern Yamal Peninsula, which historically served the European market through several pipelines, including the Nord Stream, whose supplies had ceased to flow in dispute with the EU even before it was sabotaged in 2022. A decade ago, Putin had already contemplated diverting a portion of the natural gas that was originally intended for Europe to supply China. Russia put forward a proposal to build a new gas pipeline originating from the Yamal Peninsula in central and northern Russia, passing through Mongolia and entering China. However, the current situation indicates that seeking alternatives has evolved from being a strategic choice for Russia to becoming its sole option. However, during Hu Jintao's presidency, Beijing rejected the project, which greatly frustrated Putin. He persistently pushed for the construction of Power of Siberia 2, but China remained unwilling. When Xi Jinping assumed power, he took a different approach than Hu Jintao. Xi Jinping agreed and assured Putin that there would be no problem. However, Putin argued that mere verbal assurances were insufficient. He proposed reaching an agreement, to which Xi Jinping responded positively, stating that it was possible. Prior to the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, Putin visited Beijing, where Xi Jinping specifically signed a 25-year energy supply agreement with him. This agreement included the construction of Power of Siberia 2. However, the agreement signed before the Winter Olympics was a preliminary framework, and the project's implementation still required approval from both governments. In March of this year, during Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow, Putin's primary desire was to compel Xi Jinping to sign a bilateral agreement in Moscow for the construction of Power of Siberia 2. Putin urgently needed this contract due to facing global sanctions and the deteriorating situation in the Ukrainian conflict. He aimed to use this significant contract to instill confidence in the Russian people, as it would ensure long-term supply. Prior to Xi Jinping's visit to Russia in March, Putin had already publicly boasted, "We have already discussed this matter and reached an agreement." However, during Xi Jinping's visit to Moscow, he hesitated to sign the agreement, leaving Putin frustrated. During Xi Jinping's visit, Putin even granted an interview to the Russian media, stating that both sides had finalized and agreed on all parameters regarding the Power of Siberia 2, suggesting that there were no disagreements in the contract. Russian media also reported that China and Russia had agreed on the PS2. However, the official statement from China's Xinhua news agency made no mention of the PS2. This situation portrayed Putin in an unfavorable light. Not only did he boast on the international stage, but he also struggled to explain the situation to the Russian people. The promised Power of Siberia 2, which was supposed to secure 50% of China's natural gas imports from Russia and mitigate the energy decoupling with Europe, turned out to be repeated empty promises by Xi Jinping, greatly disappointing Putin. Here are my takeaways. First, since the Hu Jintao era and continuing under Xi Jinping, the Chinese Communist Party has consistently used the Power of Siberia 2 project to provoke Russia. They expressed great interest in the project, but when it comes to actual implementation, they show reluctance and delay. This behavior is quite remarkable, as the CCP rarely engages in such tactics in its diplomatic relations with other countries. Secondly, China needs natural gas. China is currently experiencing a significant shortage of natural gas, and the price of land-based gas imports is less than 1/5 of the price of sea-based imports. It is evident that China requires a substantial amount of natural gas, particularly as it aims to reduce coal consumption and address air pollution issues. Furthermore, at the recent Central Asia Summit, China signed a natural gas pipeline agreement with Turkmenistan known as the D Pipeline Agreement. While this agreement with Turkmenistan was swiftly reached within a few days, negotiations for Power of Siberia 2 have been ongoing for over a decade without tangible progress. It is evident that China genuinely needs natural gas, and their hesitation is simply a refusal to overly depend on Russian gas. Thirdly, the PS2 involves not only Mongolia but also Kazakhstan. The proposed route of Power of Siberia 2 passes through the central and the northern region of Russia, requiring passage through Kazakhstan before reaching Mongolia and eventually China. The most straightforward and cost-effective route would be a direct path from Russia through Kazakhstan into China, a route that both China and Kazakhstan agree upon. However, Russia opposes this route. Russia argued that bypassing Kazakhstan would only marginally increase the distance and investment while potentially benefiting Mongolia. On the other hand, China sees no obligation to assist Mongolia and believes that the pipeline's construction costs should be factored into the natural gas costs, which China ultimately bears. Although China favors the route through Kazakhstan, Putin remains steadfast in rejecting this option. The fourth perspective highlights that China's strategy is primarily driven by its pursuit of energy security and a desire for a balanced approach. This is evident in China's management of crude oil imports, where Beijing limits the market share of exporting countries to 22%. If it exceeds this threshold, reductions are enforced to avoid excessive dependence. This prudent strategy is aimed at safeguarding China's interests. Similarly, China applies similar consideration to its natural gas supply. With the addition of Power of Siberia 2 to Power of Siberia 1, China's reliance on Russian natural gas would reach 50%. Such a high dependency would render China vulnerable to potential threats from Russia in the context of European gas supply. Consequently, China strives to prevent such a situation from occurring. It is unlikely for China to place such extensive reliance on Russia. The fifth viewpoint focuses on Putin's perspective. Let's consider how Putin might feel. If Beijing sets limits on its energy security arrangements and explicitly tells Putin that the construction of PS2 is not possible, it will be understandable. After all, construction has not yet begun. So why does Beijing keep teasing Putin? The Chinese Communist Party has been teasing for over a decade, and even during the recent visit of Russia's Prime Minister to China, Xi did not agree. Just imagine what might be going through Putin's mind. He surely has countless questions and concerns. However, given the current situation in Russia, Putin can only dare to be angry but not express it openly. Nevertheless, this anger is likely to ferment, and we should watch for the moment when Putin erupts. It is indeed an intriguing scenario between China and Russia. Lastly, it highlights the defensive stance of the CCP towards Russia, as evident in its approach to the Power of Siberia 2 project. Despite Xi Jinping publicly expressing his admiration for Putin and their perceived similarities in personality, his strong personal desire is to foster friendly relations with Russia and jointly confront the West. This represents a fundamental strategy for him. However, the CCP is a massive political apparatus with various factions, including individuals who possess strategic and cautious thinking. The CCP's wariness of Russia is deeply ingrained and it does not require mobilizing the Chinese population. There has always been a faction within the CCP that remains cautious of Russia. Why did Russia recently conduct a highly publicized trial for last year's espionage case involving a Russian scientist allegedly bought by Chinese intelligence agencies, particularly regarding hypersonic missile technology? Russia's global showcase of trials involving CCP spies serve as a way to strike at the CCP. Naturally, the CCP also maintains certain precautions against Russia. Thus, through the lens of the Power of Siberia 2 project, we gain a deeper understanding of the complex and elusive relationship between China and Russia. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. Just click the subscribe button right here. I'll see you again shortly. Until then, be well.